Welcome to Mr. Sleeter's Neighborhood, where I interview some of the top minds in the accounting software world. Today I have with me Leslie Shiner, a longtime friend, author, and an expert in the accounting software world, particularly in the construction industry. Leslie her background includes an MBA from Berkeley. She's a top speaker at previous Sleeter Group conferences. She's the sole inductee as the 2013 CEDIA Fellows. CEDIA is a trade association for electronic systems contractors. She's also written a book, A Simple Guide to Turning a Profit as a Contractor. She has also recently been awarded one of the top 25 thought leaders in accounting by CPA Practice Advisor magazine. So welcome, Leslie.
Great, glad to be here.
So Leslie, what are some of the hobbies or skills that you have that might surprise people in our audience?
Well, I think a lot of people really know me, so I'm not sure if they'll be totally surprised that I was a drama geek in high school. But I actually used to be an interpreter for the deaf. And so I used to be able to sing in sign language and speak in sign language and act in sign language.
All right, so sing some
No,
for
I told
me.
you not to tell me. I did jingle bells, but that was a long time ago.
Okay.
And maybe that's
Well,
why.
that's enough.
There you go, jingle bells.
Okay,
Jingle
we're
all the
good.
way.
We're good with that. Okay. You needed
Oh, what
proof.
fun it is to ride.
Oh, see, you are doing it.
Anyway, that was a long time ago. But
Cool.
I think that, people say that I speak with my hands, I talk and I move my hands a lot.
Mhm.
And that may be the fact that through high school I actually was an interpreter for the deaf.
Right. And actually, I've seen you speak a lot, and you do that, and I think it draws the audience in personally. When you've got, so I've started to mimic you.
Oh, dear.
So thank you for that.
Thanks.
That's a skill you're teaching me. Thank you for that. So, did you ever have like an aha moment?
I did actually, and it actually is related to that skill. So I did Theater of the Deaf when I was in college. And Theater of the Deaf is where the actors are on stage and they're signing. And then there's people off stage that are speaking. So you either have a speaking role or a signing role so that the hearing audience can hear and the deaf audience can see. And I was actually one of the signers.
Mhm.
And when I went on stage, I was incredibly nervous.
Mm-hmm.
And I think there must have been 10,000 people in the audience. Maybe there were 10. But looking back on it, it felt like there were 10,000 people in the audience. And my hands were literally shaking. I was so nervous. And I thought, here I am signing. They're not going to be able to understand me because my hands were shaking. And I took a deep breath and I went on stage. And the whole time I was shaking the whole time. I came off stage and I said, oh my gosh, I'm sure nobody understood anything I said because my hands were shaking. And the people that were on stage with me said, really, I never noticed. And I think my aha moment is that even though internally it feels like it's this, whatever it is, you did something stupid, you said something wrong, you're nervous, you think that it comes through, people can't read your mind, even though you think they can. And many times we overblow these things in our mind, and you can really do anything. So in some ways it's kind of a fake it till you make it thing.
Mm-hmm.
But if you have the confidence, even though inside you may be quivering,
Yeah.
it's not always seen that way.
Well, do you ever get nervous?
I do. I actually do get nervous.
Mm-hmm.
But I think because I went through that experience, I realized that whether I am or not, it doesn't matter. Nobody
Yeah.
can tell.
Yeah. So it's funny because as you're talking about that, I had the same concept as a musician in the orchestra. And I was just sure that if I missed a note, everybody knew.
Right.
And the people would come up after the concert and say how wonderful it was. I said, really? You didn't hear that awful note? So maybe it's that same kind of thing as like, yeah, they're really looking at the overall, what did they learn from you in your speeches or whatever, as opposed to, one sentence at it.
Right. We have a tendency to obsess with those one things.
Yeah.
And I think it's in speaking, it's very helpful. But I also think in consulting,
Right.
it's helpful because even though, I came up with solutions for 95% of the client's problems, but one stymied me. Instead of thinking, oh, I blew it because I couldn't do 100%, I can realize, well, they didn't even notice that. We skipped it and went on.
Yeah.
And it's really looking at the way other people perceive you as opposed to the way you think other people perceive you.
So speaking of that, have you ever wanted to have a do-over?
You had asked me that question before, and I thought about that a lot in terms of do-overs. one of the things that somebody said to me once that I thought was great is that we beat ourselves up. You have something and you think, I said something stupid, I did something stupid. And instead of beating yourself up or trying to stop yourself, say, well, stop thinking about it. If you say, you know what, I'm going to spend the next 10 minutes obsessing over it. I'm going to allow myself to obsess over 10 minutes, be so angry at myself for saying it or doing it or whatever it was, and then I'm going to have to let it go. And so you have to give yourself permission to do that. You know, do-overs in professional fields are different than do-overs in personal fields. I think that I had an experience when I was 11 that my father came in and sat down and told me that his mom had died, that my grandmother had died. And I sat there and didn't know what to say. I didn't know what to do. And I just sat there. And so I often think if I had a do-over, I would be able to know what to say. I would have given him a hug. I would have said, I'm sorry.
I see.
Any
You
of
felt
that.
you needed to help him
I
through it.
I didn't do any. Yeah, I mean, I just didn't do anything. I just and I think that translates into missed opportunities to be able to whatever that word is. Empathize. What a great word. Empathize with people and be able to say there are missed opportunities where you can connect.
Yeah.
And to always look at times when you can say, wow, I understand how you're feeling, or I'm going to find a way to connect with you and have shared experiences.
So I've had you in our conferences for years. You and I have done consulting together, and we've had a lot of different ways we've worked with people. I know what gets me up in the morning. I know what really excites me when I go to work. But tell us about, what is it that when you get up, you're like, are you excited for the day? And what is it that drives you to go work?
It's always been that I love what I do. And I think what's exciting is when I find a challenge at work, or I have a client that has some unique problem and we've figured it out, or we have a financial statement that's a total disaster and we get it to be clean. It's that whole working through a process that I find so fun. And people will laugh at me because, you know, I'll say, wow, look at that, we got the bank account to reconcile. And they're like, you're so excited about a bank account that can reconcile. And it's those sorts of things. It's kind of, to me, what my day is when I'm doing consulting is puzzle finishing up puzzles.
Yeah.
You know, and I like puzzles. I like mind games and mind puzzles. And that's what accounting is when you get into these situations.
Right.
Here's a puzzle. How do we solve it?
One of the things I didn't mention in your background that I know about you is you worked in a company that ultimately got bought by Intuit that did construction software. So you worked at the company, but before the company, you worked for many years as a consultant on, it was Master Builder, which is now owned by Sage.
Right.
And so you became the queen of Master Builder and the most prolific consultant on the product. So how did you go from like consulting with clients to joining the company to then the big company and then back into your own business?
Well, you know, I made a mistake of going and being interviewed by them. I didn't realize it was an interview. The management called me and said, what's wrong with the training department? So I spent 45 minutes telling them what was wrong with it, and they said, well, who could fix it? We think you're the only one that could fix it. So I've been consulting forever, and I thought, wouldn't it be nice to get a 9-to-5 job so I wouldn't work every evening and every weekend?
Yeah, little did you know.
Little did you know. That was my thought about what corporate America was like. So I went to work and I took a full-time job, and it's interesting because like I said, I've been doing my own forever and never really spent a lot of time in a full-time employee position. I've been a consultant for so long that I really missed the opportunity to be with my kids in a way that I am as a consultant. You know, I joke about I have a flexible time. I get to pick whatever 12 hours a day I work. But I always took off time. Tuesdays and Thursday afternoons were my times with the kids, so I never had meetings after 2 o'clock on Tuesdays or Thursdays.
Right.
They had I could go in the classroom and help out. I could go take a look at if they had a concert, a singing concert.
Right.
And when I was working, and I'd only worked as a full-time employee for a fairly short period of time, I missed a couple of those, and I thought, this isn't it. I got home exhausted at 5 or 6 or 6:30 or 7 at night, And I thought, I want to go back to, yeah, I'm going to work in the evenings after the kids go to bed, but at least I'm there when they're awake.
Right.
And when my kids were very little, I worked mostly 9 to 5 Saturdays. 9 p.m. Saturday to 5 a.m. on Sunday, because the phones didn't ring. I was incredibly productive. I was young then.
Right.
And then the kids would go out for breakfast, and I'd sleep till noon or whatever. And that to me is, yeah, I still work a lot, but when my kids were young and they needed me to be around, I was around for them as well, and be able to mix that.
Well, I appreciate you share all that, because a lot of people in our audience are doing the same thing. They're looking for this. How can I manage the kids and the home life and the business life? And that's one of the best things I've found about being a consultant to small business is nobody dies if you're not there in 5 minutes. You can block time. You can work any hours on the clock, and you can be your own boss, which is sort of what you gave up then when you went to the corporations.
Right.
Yeah. So, can you tell me? I know you probably look up to people over your lifetime. What's the most, the best advice you've ever gotten? And in a minute, I'm going to ask you from whom, or maybe it's not from that same person. But what's some really good advice you've gotten?
Well, I think there are a couple of things. The first is that when I got a job out of college, my goal was to make my age. God, if I could make like $20,000 a year, I would be rich. And then 23, because I was 22 at the time. And I have to say who it was, but so my father was in business. And so I said, how do I go? And I'm going to ask for a raise. And he said that the only way a company should and could and would give you a raise is if you can prove that you provide more value to that company. He said, because he ran a business. He would say, if someone comes to me and says, I need a raise because my kids need braces, he'd say, not my problem. If you come and say, I need a raise because I'm doing this, and this, which is providing the value, and therefore your company is doing this, and move it from a company perspective, then somebody will say, yeah, that makes a lot of sense. And I thought it was an interesting story because I've worked with business owners, and I've seen them have that discussion, what should I pay my employees? And this guy really, gosh, he just had a kid. But it's all really in the business world, and not to sound heartless, but it really is, what's the value that you bring? So when I come to a company, what's the value that I bring to them? And if I charge a lot of money, then I better bring a lot of value.
Right.
And so you go back to, what can I provide to a company, whether it's I ask for an increased billing rate, or I'm an employee and I ask for a raise. It's looking at what provides the value, and therefore you deserve that, since you can provide that type of value to the company.
Yeah, that's perfect, because I've heard this same thing over and over from consultants in the Sleeter network. What should I charge? And I never give them a straight answer, because it's not like I know. But I do believe that it has everything to do with your own self-value. The way if you can say $100 an hour without flinching, then you can earn 100. But if you say 100 is, I'm really 30 is all they can afford, or something like that, you get into this mind trip on your own about, I'm not really worth the higher dollars, so I'm not going to raise my fees.
I've told people to do this, to stand in front of a mirror and say, I charge $500 an hour. And just say it over and over again, because you're like, oh my God, that's ridiculous, and I don't charge $500 an hour.
Sure.
But you say something, I charge $1,000 an hour.
Yeah.
And so then when you come in with whatever that rate is, well, gosh, compared to 1,000, it's pretty darn cheap, right?
That's right.
And yes, but again, it has to do with the value.
Right.
Now, I originally set my rates on supply and demand. Someone asked me how much I charged. I looked at my black book. We had the black book back then, right? And if it was pretty darn empty, I wouldn't raise my rates. But if there was a lot of appointments, I'd just throw out a bigger number. And then they wouldn't flinch.
Right.
And it always amazes me when I negotiate with something, and I have a woman that works for me, and whenever we discuss that, I always bring out a higher number, because they can always say no.
Yeah.
But or you're amazed when you put out, and I do proposals now because I do some flat fee work, and I put out a number, and they're like, okay, fine.
Yeah.
And you think, man, I should have asked for
That's
more
right.
if
That's
they say
But
that.
I think it has everything to do with how you went in there with your confidence. In other words, you didn't say, well, can you do 500 an hour? You don't say it that way. You said, well, I don't know what the number was, but can you do 1,000 for this project? You don't say, can you? Well, I can do this for 1,000.
Yeah.
Very
It's-
confident.
I was on the phone and I'm doing this project and it's a really small project and I said, and let's talk money. And he goes, well, I think we're probably going to do, I don't know, between 500 and 750 for the project. And I said, okay, well, 750 is fine. He threw it out there. I'm not going to say, well, 500. I'll go, okay, fine.
Yeah.
And constantly looking at that, pushing that boundary.
Yeah. It's great. So, Leslie, when you need advice, who do you turn to?
Well, it's funny because my sister actually she was in corporate America for 30 years.
Mm-hmm.
And my older, much older sister.
Can you remind her of this?
20 years older than I am. And I often come to her with business advice because my father's no longer with me.
Mm-hmm.
And we have this joke because we always say, what would Dad do?
Mm-hmm.
And then I now actually, quite often I go to her for advice, but she's not around, so I just get the answer anyway. And I say, what would she do? So what's interesting is that I think if you've been around long enough, you can internalize these things. So when I do have problems, I'll sit down and have this conversation with this other person who's not a part of the conversation and know what the right thing is.
Right.
And it's finding a way to internalize that. Certainly I didn't in the beginning, and we had this joke about what would Dad do, but I think it's important to have somebody who's slightly better. Someone else also asked me once how do I know so much?
Mm-hmm.
And the only way is I find somebody who knows more than I do, and I pick their brain. It's finding somebody who's that much better at whatever it is you're trying to do and trying to get there.
Mm-hmm.
And that's the same thing with things like exercise.
Yeah.
You know, I can do it on my own, or I can have somebody who I can find who's slightly better at it than I am and push myself.
Yeah.
And it's those sorts of things of finding somebody who does what you do only a little bit better
Yeah.
and being able to ask them questions and look to them for advice.
Yeah, I find the same thing. If I play racquetball, if I play somebody much better than me, too bad for him, but I'm learning a lot. I'm getting a lot of benefit. Playing somebody much worse, you're helping them, which is fine, but you're not nearly as challenged, or you didn't learn as much. So yeah. So tell me about some of the difficulties that you've had to overcome, whether it's career difficulties or personal difficulties. What you can kind of
Well, everybody's had ups and downs in their life, and there have been a couple of major sort of downs in my life that I realized at the time seemed like they were horrible, but really they were good.
Mm-hmm.
I had a job when I got out of college. I had a job that I just despised, and I thought I gotta stay there for 2 years because I want to go to grad school, and I hated it. I didn't know what I was doing. I actually started stuttering. Can you imagine me stuttering? And then I got hepatitis,
Wow.
and I was out of commission for 6 weeks, and I lost my job because they're not supposed to fire you.
So your body got you.
So my body told me I needed to do that.
Yeah.
And the other experience happened with my son when he was born. When he was 7 days old, he ended up in the hospital with what's called a FUO, fever of unknown origin.
Wow.
And they treat it as if it's spinal meningitis.
Wow.
Scary, scary thing. And it seems odd for me to say it, but to me that was like one of the best things that ever happened. Mm-hmm. Because I had a 2-year-old, I was running around being super mom, still working, doing all of this stuff, and then all of a sudden this smack upside the head that said, why don't you just sit in the hospital for a day and just hold him? And so I think these things happen, these challenges happen in our life, and they seem at the time, the other one happened when I didn't get into the grad school I wanted to get into, and then I ended up a year later at Berkeley.
Yeah.
When something horrible happens, you're like, oh, it's going to ruin my life, and if you later think back on it, quite often it was actually a smack upside the head that turned you around, where you can turn these obstacles, it sounds silly to say, but into learning opportunities.
Yeah, that's perfect. It just resonates with me. We all have had it. Have you ever been in a situation where basically everything was going wrong? I'm reminded of the Apollo 13 movie. I don't know if you saw
I
that.
did.
Where the mission controller says, okay, what on the ship is not broken?
So
Yeah.
when I was a consultant, first starting out, big shot, know what I'm doing. I go into this company and, I'm looking at their stuff and I reboot their computer after we swap floppies. I can't even say floppies anymore. And up on the screen comes something that says, it was blue, and it said, fatal error reading drive C.
Been there.
And then I turned to them and I said, do you back up? Well, I probably should have asked that before. And she goes, I was going to ask you, now for some of you might not realize what we used to do because we're old. She said, when it asks you to swap out and put in a different floppy, what happens if you just leave it in there while you're backing up?
Oh.
And I literally thought, you picture yourself crawling under the table or under the desk and dying. Can I just crawl under the desk and keel over and have a heart attack? And, I think about that a lot because I thought I was getting cocky.
Right.
I think when you get cocky,
Right.
things sometimes happen.
Mm-hmm.
And then turning it around, thinking I've lost the client, I've lost everything. I mean, it was a horrible weekend, I promise you that.
Yeah.
But I ended up keeping the client.
Mm-hmm.
I ended up making sure that they got what they needed.
Yeah.
They took some responsibility. It,
Right.
It really wasn't my fault because I rebooted the computer.
Yeah.
But it's those sorts of things where everything goes wrong and you turn it into a learning opportunity and you turn it into, in essence, a
Right.
way to continue
Yeah.
to do what you do and say, great, I learned from that.
Yeah. I talk about something similar here in the concept of trust. And without trust, nothing else works. And what I think you just said right there is your client trusted you. You had built trust. And so because there was now a failure, a mistake that maybe you had part of is what you're kind of saying. They because they trusted you, they forgave you and wanted you to continue as opposed
Right.
to blaming you. Sometimes in our
And
business,
I took responsibility.
That's right. You didn't.
I didn't try and
Right.
shirk my responsibility.
Yes.
And it brings up a story I hadn't even thought of in a long time. I had another in my beginning consulting career, and I was this was on Master Builder, and it was a really nice company, and it was a woman that was the wife of the owner,
Right.
actually ex-wife, another story, but and I did a couple of consulting gigs with her, and then she called up the company and said, I think I really like Leslie a lot, and she's really smart, but I don't understand the things she's saying. And they asked for somebody else.
Uh-huh.
And luckily, I got the phone call that said, this is what happened. And again, it's like, okay, somebody's telling me I've got to change the way I relate. The other consultant flaked, as many consultants do. They called me back in. And the funny thing about that was 20 years ago, and they're still a client of mine.
Yeah.
And it's that continuing to get feedback. What am I doing right? I loved, oh yeah, you're fabulous. But also, what am I doing wrong? What could I do to improve? And
Right.
to always look at, I go back to what I said earlier, value, what value am I providing to the company? What value do I provide to my
Right.
clients? What value do I provide so that they will see value and
Yeah.
want me to come back?
Have you ever fired yourself from?
I absolutely have fired myself.
Yeah.
I had a company and I actually gave them a refund. I said, you guys are not listening to my advice.
Yep.
You are headed toward bankruptcy.
Mm-hmm.
And they hired me 2 years earlier. I gave them a bunch of advice. They brought me back in, hadn't done anything.
Right.
And I said, until you listen to my advice or until
Yeah.
you want to make a change,
Right.
there's really no reason
really
for us
make-
to work
yeah,
together. I
yeah.
can't help you.
All right, so let's go back to the beginning. So try to remember that for when we start out in right after college or whatever, we all have some job, or maybe it's even in high school. There's something for me and most of us, I think, that we try out jobs. We like some, we don't like some. How would you characterize those experiences, whether they're jobs or somebody you even in your personal life, that kind of prepared you to become what you then decided to make your life?
Right.
Your life.
Yeah, I mean, I think
Career.
in many cases we sort of fall into what we do.
Right.
I had all sorts of interesting jobs in college.
Mm-hmm.
I was a cashier. I'm going to age myself at the King Tut Museum exhibit. I actually worked in a methadone treatment clinic.
Mm-hmm.
I actually pumped gas for 2 summers.
Wow.
And I think that it's important to really understand, again, what you're doing when you have those jobs. I ultimately got a job where I started out as a receptionist, funny enough,
Mm-hmm.
and I worked really hard. I provide value for the company, and one of the guys that I worked for realized that I had an aptitude toward numbers. And then I became a statistician, and then I sort of moved forward. And I think what I learned from that, and what I've taught my kids, in particular my oldest daughter, is that cream rises to the top.
Mm-hmm.
And so my daughter has an undergraduate degree in history, as you know that, and
Mm-hmm.
what, $5 will get you a cup of coffee at Starbucks.
Yeah.
And that was so valuable, she decided to get a master's in Welsh history, making her
Mm-hmm.
even less employable. And so I helped her put together a resume, and first thing we did was we took off all the educational degrees. They're very impressive. But unless you're going to teach Welsh history in college, which she wasn't going to do, it's not going to help you get a job. So I helped her get a job. She got a job as, funny enough, as a part-time receptionist. 3 days a week. That was it. And they realized that she was really smart.
Mm-hmm.
Just like I think in anything that you do. And so then she went to a full-time office manager. And now she's actually in charge of logistics and operations.
Right.
And she is a great example of cream rising to the top.
Mm-hmm.
There was a time there in the dot-com bubble and boom, you could get out of college and get a degree and then get a job for $150,000 a year. That was a perfect job.
Mm-hmm.
But I don't think that happens anymore.
Yeah.
And I think I see that with consultants. I think I see that with companies I work with, that if you're really smart and you really work hard and provide value, then cream will rise to the top and you can get to where you want to be.
So let's talk a little bit about teaching, because I know you're a teacher, educator, and speaker, motivational speaker in many ways too. But how did you decide that you wanted to go be a teacher? And then before you answer that, I got your book here. Your Simple Guide to Turning a Profit as a Contractor. How did you
Get to
did you
there?
decide to do this?
So when I actually went to college, I was heading to be a teacher. I was actually going to be a special ed teacher. That's why I learned sign language. I was teaching autistic children.
Right.
And I loved teaching. And at the same time, I wanted to take a break.
Mhm.
And that's how I ended up doing that job, where I became a statistician and got into the numbers. I've always just loved teaching. And at the same time, teaching accounting in particular and those types of things, I like it because I think of it as an aha moment teaching opportunity.
Mm-hmm.
When I taught accounting, and actually I worked with a guy when I was in my master's program, and we took accounting together, and he didn't understand any of it until at the very end when he goes, "Oh my God, it all makes sense." Because I think accounting is very much like that.
Yeah, you get an aha.
You
at
get
some
an
point.
aha at some point. You're struggling with these stupid debit and credit thingies and
Right.
balance sheet, and all of a sudden it just all fits together.
Mhm.
So I'd always wanted to write a book, and this goes back to what I said earlier about finding somebody to sort of motivate you.
Mhm.
I hooked up with this woman. I can't say hooked up because that's a different terminology.
Anymore.
Very wrong.
Melanie.
So cut that part out. So I combined forces with a woman, Melanie,
Uh-huh.
because she also wanted
That's
to
Melanie
write a book.
Hodgson.
Melanie Hodgson. Melanie Hodgson.
Mm-hmm.
And she's in the speaking circuit with contractors as well. I met her, and we realized that we thought a lot alike.
Right.
And what's so cool about being able to write a book is that she wanted to, would never have the time. I
Right.
wanted to, would never have the time. But because the two of us did it together, we had deadlines.
Mm-hmm.
One person write a chapter. We then had to meet, and we met remotely
Kept each other
and kept
honest.
each other honest and
Yeah.
kept each other on schedule
Yeah,
and made
yeah.
it happen.
Right.
The other funny thing is we think so much alike that we each took turns writing chapters and doing illustrations and all of that.
Right.
And now when I go back and read the book, other than the first couple of pages, which I know who wrote, I can't tell who wrote what. I don't really remember because we went back and worked so well together.
Yeah.
And that's like your racquetball. You know,
Right.
if I have to go out and play racquetball by myself, if I find somebody else who I can do it with who's going to keep me on task, then I think that makes a difference.
Yeah.
And we specifically wrote that book so it was not a how-to.
Right.
It wasn't something the owner would pick up and say to the bookkeeper, "Oh, here, this is for you."
Step-by-step things.
Step by step.
Right?
It's really bringing it. It's a business fable about this poor guy named Mike, who's a contractor who gets his tax return and owes a bunch of money to the IRS. Turns to his bookkeeper who says, "You have nothing in the bank," and he says, "How can I owe money to the IRS when I have no money in my checking account?" But so it's really finding a way to teach people with the aha moment to help them understand why that's so important to run your business with an understanding of the numbers instead of with the gut. And so I think that's what's a real, again, a learning opportunity for me, and then a teaching opportunity is it's just so fun to work with somebody and see, oh, they're starting to get it.
Yeah.
And when they do get it, and now you can help them and say, wow, they're really profitable.
Yeah.
And I want my clients to be successful. I want everybody to make lots of money. I think that's so exciting.
Yeah.
And that's what makes it so fun.
Yeah. Well, thank you very much. This has been fascinating to hear your story and learn what makes you tick. And I just am so glad to know you and
Oh, great. It's been fun.
be
I appreciate it.
colleagues together in so many ways. So
Well,
thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you.